TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Video shoot interview series. It is more than a pleasure to be in the house of none other than Cowboy Bill Watts, the guy who definitely pioneered the sport of professional wrestling in the 80s. I guess the first question I want to get into is, talking about your background in football and the University of Oklahoma.
Well, I went to the University of Oklahoma on a football scholarship, played for Bud Wilkinson, and they had actually gotten into an era where they believed in small and quick. And kids were changing, and I was one of the kids that were changing, and they used to pull me down so low in body weight that I really didn't have much strength. They did the same thing to Wahoo McDaniels, who played there. He played at 188 pounds, and they pulled me down to 215 my first year, and then my junior year, I was the heaviest man on the team at 229, so it was really debilitating for me because I was trying to grow. I was then in a car train wreck, and I came out of the hospital after being unconscious for a couple of weeks, and I was under 200 pounds when I came out of the hospital. I normally weighed about 245 pounds. And it took about 6 months to where I could do a simple somersault and come back up into a hitting position. But I got on weight training by complete accident. And back then, they forbid you lifting weights at the University of Oklahoma and most colleges because they didn't understand it. They'd seen guys transform their bodies, but the guys were still uncoordinated because they hadn't done anything for coordination. So they blamed that on weights and said the weights were making them muscle bound, which is a complete falsehood. So I got on weights by accident. And I was about 245, and 7 months later, I was 315 pounds, and I was Superman. And it just blew me away. I didn't really realize what had happened to me, and they didn't either. And there was not really a place for me to continue playing at the University of Oklahoma. The wrestling coach wanted me to continue wrestling there because they had a two-time NCAA wrestling champion, and I'd wrestled through high school and college, and I could pin him 3 times in 90 seconds. After that. So they wanted me to continue wrestling, and I went ahead and signed pro and went pro with the Houston Oilers. And then I think I ended up knocking out the head coach, and they take a dim view of that. But I played for a man that was a lot of class, Bud Wilkinson, and he may get on you, but he didn't cuss you out where it was personally derogatory like some of the pro coaches do. And when this guy did that, I think I lit him up, and so they gave me my walk-in papers, and eventually I ended up in pro wrestling, and it was a natural fit.
Who was Dale Lewis? He was on the wrestling team.
Yeah, Dale was a two-time NCAA champion, and Dale was very instrumental when I first got in the business. Dale was already in the business, and Danny Hodge was in the business, and Wahoo McDaniel. And so, matter of fact, Wahoo was home visiting one time and cashed a check. I can't remember the amount of it, but I said, my gosh, what's that for? He said, for wrestling. I said, for a month? He said, no. And I said, for a week? He said, no, 1 match. I said, who do you have to kill? I can beat you in 30 seconds. So I said, I wanted this business. And Wahoo helped get me in the business. And then Dale Lewis and I had an apartment together, and I was in Indianapolis breaking in the business. And I played with a pro football team in Indianapolis called the Indianapolis Warriors. And Dale and I lived together with a guy named Bob Griffin, who was a great all-pro from the NFL, who was one of the coaches. And that's what I did to break into the wrestling business.
So you were never really a fan. You just do some of the boys.
That was never a fan. The wrestling I saw back here, I thought was ludicrous.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when Hodge would come back to the wrestling room, we'd all ask him why he was in that phony business. And he would always try to justify it. And, of course, we knew what a great athlete Hodge was. But the wrestling here at that time was all junior heavyweights and over-the-hill guys. There were very few great athletes here. There weren't any of the great professional wrestlers that you saw in mainstream America.
Who actually trained you? Was it Wahoo or was it
Well, no, Wahoo some, and Dale Lewis an awful lot, and then Mark Starr and a guy named Art Nielsen, and then a series of guys. And so back then you learned from working out with different guys, Dr. Bill Miller, and I was in Indianapolis, and that's what we would do. And then I finally had a match. My first match, I think, was in Portsmouth, Ohio. And then each guy that you wrestled would also, in a way, coach you.
Right. What was the first promotion that you actually started working for on a full-time basis?
Well, that was for Barnett owned the promotion, but a guy named Balk Estes was running it, and it was a terrible promotion. Barnett was at that time, I think, involved in Louisville chasing Rock Hudson, and So when everybody talks about Rock Hudson being a homosexual, I knew he was a fag a long time ago.
Right.
So anyway, Barnett was involved with that, and Balk Estes was running the territory right into the ground. It was a horrible promotion, but it was the only one I could get started in. So I had about 10 matches back there, and then they wouldn't even use me. That's how terrible that promotion was. So I came home and then tried to get Leroy to use me, and they had all junior heavyweights here. And I was in a real bad street fight in Oklahoma City, and I broke my hand, so they let me do some special refereeing. And then out of that, some of the old-time heels here were looking for new blood, and they realized that just from the refereeing, the reaction I got, that I could draw money. So when my hand got well, and they started booking me, and I started out drawing everybody here, which created a lot of jealousy because I was out drawing the junior heavyweights. And Leroy was blind, and he'd been a phenomenal athlete. This is
Leroy McGurk, right?
Yeah,
okay.
A phenomenal athlete and a phenomenal promoter in his day, but he could only go by hearsay, and everybody was always coming to him with what greased their way instead of what was best for the area. So finally, Leroy then had Lou Thez book me out of here, and that's how you started. You'd go to different territories, and you'd see if you got over. It was a real weird thing. You had to get yourself over or have somebody help you learn enough. So I was only in Indianapolis, I guess, about 10 matches. I met some great guys there. Don Leo Jonathan, like I say, Art Nielsen, Mark Lewin, guys like that. And some of those relationships were very important later, but I guess I was already starting to learn there. Then I came here, and they had a guy named the Great Bolo, and he had a tremendous psychology for the business, and I was new blood. So he wanted me, and my gosh, we drew business everywhere because I was fresh and new and just had that certain charisma that draws people.
Where did you go from there?
Went to Los Angeles, and there I got in some trouble and had to leave the country for a short time, and hid out with Don Leo Jonathan's house on the beach for 3 days until I could get out of the country. Then I went on up to Portland, wrestled one night on the way to Canada, and wrestled Vancouver. And stayed in Vancouver for a while and got over there and sold out and was drawing money and was getting paid so terribly I couldn't stand it. Rod Fenton was such a thief as a promoter. And that's about the same time that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and then they shut down the business and everything up there. So I was up there starving to death.
What year was this around?
Whatever the year they shot Kennedy. Right. I'm terrible on dates. But but I met some great people there. Gene Kaniski. Waldo Von Erich, Anton the Ripper Leone, and guys like that. And I, like I say, I Sweet Daddy Siki, but I got over and I started selling out, and they paid 5 guys more than I got paid on the bout that I sold out. And I asked the promoter about it, and he said, "Kid, you're lucky to get to work main events as new as you are." And I said, "Then why don't you put some of these hot shots that are so damn good back on the main events that weren't drawing any money?" It seems like the only difference I know is when I was the main event, it was a sellout.
Right.
So we had a big argument, and I just packed my bag and headed home. And then back then was in the days of the NWA was real powerful, and they were never going to let me wrestle again and all this stuff. But unfortunately, it already leaked out that I was business. So I had more offers than ever. So I came back here and wrestled for Leroy McGurk for a while.
Okay. At the time, did you have your own plane?
That was way
okay.
No,
it was way after, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was told that you had your own plane and you were able to get a lot of bookings through that.
No, I know. I didn't have my own plane until I bought in the promotion here.
Okay.
Matter of fact, Killer Kowalski was one that helped teach me to fly back in the East Coast when he bought his. He had a Bonanza way back when I went back east.
Right. So I guess you came back here and you worked for Leroy?
I worked for Leroy for a while, and then they sent me to Houston, Texas. And I was supposed to go. They wanted a big white guy that could go down there and do a job for a guy named Sailor Art Thomas, who was a phenomenal human being, tremendous specimen. I went down and met the promoter, who was a guy named Morris Siegel, a multimillionaire, very smart guy, but he was in bad health. But he liked me. So back then you had 3 falls, and you go back to the dressing room between each fall. So I'm working with Sailor Art Thomas, and I got so exhausted because he was basically, Sailor was the nicest guy in the world, but not very smart. I mean, he's really dumb.
Right.
And he would forget even what you would tell him from the time you'd tell him to throw him in the ropes to come off. And so it was really a hard match. And so I just reverted back to amateur and would just take him down. Well, a lot of those guys didn't know how to wrestle. So he wouldn't know what to do but lay on his back. And so I must have taken him down about 20 times. And they said, well, take the championship. You've destroyed him. So I became the Texas champion.
Oh.
So all the, big deal. So I was the Texas champion, green as grass. And then Morris Siegel's daughter started wanting to date me, and I had to run in with her because I didn't think she was near as appealing as she thought she was. So I got the banana run. I got all the bad towns. And I got in my first fight with a promoter over a town in Lake Charles where they'd had a tar and feather match, and the feathers and chocolate syrup were still in the showers, stagnated, and there was broken glass in the ring from the light bulbs, and I cussed him out and slapped him around, and here I'm a preliminary boy because I thought the way that they were treating us. And and so anyway, I had some trouble there. And then the funniest, the great story is a cowboy Bob Ellis was a big star.
Right.
And he'd been a big star in Indianapolis. And I always remember the guys that treated me well when I was just a preliminary guy. And Bob Ellis was a nice guy like Don Leo Jonathan. I mean, Don Leo Jonathan was a big star as well as an awesome man. And he treated me so well, and Art Nielsen. But anyway, and I got to mention Carl von Bronner too. He really had a lot to do with the formulation of my career, but in my mind. But Bob Ellis had treated me real well, so they wanted me to do a job for Bob Ellis on Dallas TV.
Right.
And they came up and they tried to swerve me. A guy named Marvin Jones, the referee, said, "Look, we're going to get you disqualified the first fall, and he's going to beat you the second fall." And I said, "Fuck you, that's too straight." He said, "No, we're going DQ." And I said, "I'm not stupid. It's still too straight." I said, "Tell that big star to get his best hold. I'll just go kick his ass."
Right.
Well, they already knew I had a temper, and they already knew I could wrestle. And so Bob Ellis was just shook completely because he didn't want to have to go fight me over $25 on TV, which is what it was going to be. And I said, "Hey, Bob, you treated me like a million. I'm going to put you over out there. I just don't want the office to know I'm going to do it."
Right.
Because they're so chicken shit. So when we did a deal, and I juiced him, and then the Marvin Jones was also the referee. Came in, I ripped his shirt off and literally physically threw him out of the ring and scared the shit out of him. They DQ'd me, and then I told Bob to jump me right after they rang the bell on the DQ and just go ahead and make a big comeback and beat me. Boom, they did. So I was going upstairs. Well, I already gotten a call from Vern Gagne that a guy named Van Brocklin wanted me to come up and play for the Minnesota Vikings. So I was going to go play for the Vikings. And they came up there and said, "Man, this audience," which, by the way, the Texas was dead then. And that audience there was 25 or 30 people that I don't care what happened. They were sitting on their hands. It was so boring. And we had a complete riot that day. And so they said, "We're changing the main event. And you're the main event against Bob Ellis next week right here in Dallas. It's going to be a Texas death match." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "It's going to be a little tough." They said, "Why?" I said, "Because my ass is gone. I'm leaving." "When?" "Right now." And I left.
Right.
And so I didn't see Bob out for years, but he was a really neat guy. And I went up and I worked out with the Vikings. And then the Vikings wanted me to stay, but they had a guy named Jim Finks that was the general manager then. And he wouldn't allow me to wrestle in the off season. Well, I think your contract back then was $6,000 or $8,000 as a lineman in the NFL. That's what you made back then, and I could make a lot more wrestling. So I didn't stay. And I came back home and went on with my career.
Now, you went back to Leroy at any time during this?
Well, I came back here. Let's see. I think then I started wrestling here, and I met Wild Red Berry in Joplin, Missouri.
Right.
He was home on a holiday. And when he saw me, he went back and told Vince McMahon Sr. and Toots Mondt about this young kid back here that was going to be a star. And so I'm down in Wichita Falls, Texas at a 4-H barn arena. We didn't even have a telephone. Didn't even have bathrooms in the dressing room. Nasty, filthy place wrestling. The cops came and got me, said I had an emergency call. And I thought, gee whiz, something must be wrong with my parents. When I got there, the number they gave me was in Washington, D.C., and it was Vince McMahon and Toots Mondt. And they said, "Wild Red Berry says you're going to be a star. We want you. We want you to be on TV next Thursday in Washington." I said, "Well, you'll have to call Mr. McGurk and ask him." They said, "You just get your bags packed. We'll take care of Mr. McGurk." So when I saw Leroy the next day, he said, "You're on the way to Washington." So I went to Washington, and that's where I started my career back east. And I didn't even understand it. They'd had me on 5 TVs a week. I'm starving to death. And Red Berry took me and let me live in his apartment with him because he said, "They're making you a star. You don't even realize it." And so that's what happened. And that's where I got started there. And the first big match I had was with Killer Kowalski in Washington, D.C. It was a 20-minute Broadway, and we tore the joint down, and that made me a star to go 20 minutes Broadway with Killer Kowalski. That's how big a star he was. But we had a phenomenal, and Vince and them were there. They booked Killer and I everywhere. I think we went against each other 4 times in Washington, D.C. And so that's what happened. And then, of course, I met Bruno Sammartino.
You set a tennis record at MSG.
Yeah, and Bruno Sammartino was a different human being. He was truly, I don't say was, he is. He is so high quality. He is such a phenomenal guy. He had such a feel for people, and we just became instant friends. And we tag teamed for about a year. Then we came up with an angle that set all box office records. And it was Bruno Sammartino was really an important person in my life.
Why did you leave that promotion?
I always believed in leaving on top, and I'd done what I thought I needed to do there, and so I wanted to go other places. I guess I had this yearning to learn more, not realizing, and I never realized at that point I was going to be a promoter. So I went back and went to work for Roy Shires in San Francisco, and I worked for Roy Shires for a little over a year, and that was a great education. Shires was a genius. I think his only problem was he didn't know how to delegate anything. You never knew anything. He never asked you your opinion. He never incorporated your mind in anything. And so what I learned under him was he was a genius and he had great control, but he didn't really know how to get people bigger than they were because he didn't include them.
Right.
So that was a very formative period of time. And of course, then I got to wrestle with Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson was learning under Ray Stevens at the time. Ray Stevens nobody could touch him. And then I had a tag partner named Jim Haiti, who was phenomenal. And later Joe Scarpa, who became Jay Strongbow.
Right.
And that's where I met Thunderbolt Patterson. And
I think Piper was down there, but maybe that was after.
No, Roddy wasn't there yet.
After.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was, and I got Cyclone Negro, and I wrestled against Fritz Von Erich, and a lot of dynamite talent. I became Shires champion and stayed there, and the trips were so short, I was bored. I was used to working every night of the week and traveling my ass off, and all of a sudden I'd be home every night and make good money. So, but it was a real learning period of time for me there, too, under Shires. And then I went to Japan. Then I came back, and then I quit the business. I got into a network marketing company because I wanted to see what I could do. I wanted to know if I could build a business outside the wrestling business in case something happened to me. I was always one of these people that continued education. I was taking my CPA stuff by correspondence and different things like that because I realized that 2 things. If it didn't work out or you got that debilitating injury, you were at that mercy. So I quit the business for a little over a year and did very well in this company. And then I came back in and I went up for Vern Gagne. And Gagne was a real education. A really important guy in my life, a guy that I respect so much, a challenging guy. Gagne is a challenging guy. The friendship was there, but also the challenge was always there. He would always see how much shit he could make you take before you lash back at him. He just wanted to check you, but he was a class guy. He could see the big picture so well. He was terrible about details. So I was learning from Shires the details, and I mean Shires the details. I mean Shires told you how to do your interview. He told you step by step what he wanted. And then he had the greatest executioner in the world in Ray Stevens out there to execute the matches, and fabulous talent. And Shires was the opposite of the East Coast. Shires was high-packed energy in the matches, lots of bumps, lots of action. Whereas the East Coast was the old formula. They put the nobody against the star and pound, 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 pound. So I was seeing different aspects. And then Gagne was in between there where the guys did more of their expression on their interviews. But he had Larry Hennig, who's one of the all-time greats, and he was teamed with Harley Race. Right. So that was a completely different team than Patterson and Stevens, but still such an awesome team. And the Crusher Lazowski could get a match out of anybody. So he had this way of taking anybody and picking out their strong point and capitalizing on it. So that was an awesome thing to learn. And of course, Dick Beyer was there as Dr. X, and Dick Beyer is a phenomenal person as well as wrestler. So I got exposed to all of that talent there. There was so many. I'm sure I'm forgetting them, but these people made deep impressions. And then Leroy called me crying and drunk, and and wanted me to come back because his territory was in the deal and this and that and the other. And I said, all right, I'll come back and if you'll let me be your partner. And then he got scared. So then he wanted Vern and Fritz to be his partner. And then they offered me 5%. And I said, screw you guys. I'm going to go do the work for, no. And so I quit Vern and I said, Leroy, I'll come home and make my own deal with you. So they panicked about that. So anyway, I got 19%. They got 20 and 20. And Hodge got 10 and Leroy had this and that. And I worked here. And finally, I worked here, and I mean, this was like.
So then you were wrestling and starting the book?
Yeah, but this was like the death area. There was no talent.
Right.
It was horrible. The weather was horrible. The economy was horrible. And Leroy was surrounded so deep with stooges that sucked up to him and would go in and tear down everything you did. It was so hard, but we still made money and got it going. And Dutch Savage was the first big name that would come home, and he worked here and gave me his heart. And boy, and then the weather was so bad, he finally said, I've done all I can. I'll give you a 5-week notice. I said, Dutch, we're going to sell out every night on your way out. I'm sorry, you're going to miss it. And we did.
Right.
And then the next guy that came in that was huge was, of course, Gary Hart and the Spoiler. And then Waldo Von Erich. And of course, Gary Hart was the greatest manager at that time. And the Spoiler was an awesome. And so by then we were getting into it and I was learning and learned more and more. And we had it really, really going. But I got so sick and tired of dealing with Leroy and all his negativeness and the drunkenness and all the stuff that you had to do to deal with it, that it was tearing me down inside where I was questioning my own knowledge and my own values. So about that time, there was that deal happening in Georgia, and Eddie Graham had been watching me. And Eddie was such a student, and he was watching me, and he wanted me to get involved with him. But the thing came up in Georgia where Gunkel had double-crossed his partners, and then he dropped dead of a heart attack, so his wife and his booker decided to go on, and all the guys double-crossed except one guy. One guy stayed with Paul Jones in the promotion. That guy's name was Bob Armstrong, who was a quality guy. And so Eddie brought me in the start of this, what they used to call a war then. And,
right.
And I worked on that first card that the NWA put together. And then he says, I want you to come here and work for me in Florida. But he said, I want you to go to Georgia first. So he gave me my stock in Georgia as a gift to go work there. And he made me the real power in the dressing room and everything. But he had his ex-partner, Lester Welch, and his son running the business on the front, and Leo Garibaldi was the booker. So we kept trying to work through Leo, and Leo had a tremendous mind, but he just did stupid shit. So we'd always have to override him, and we started selling out and doing huge business, and that's where Eddie and I really got so close, and that's where I understood what a genius Eddie Graham was. I learned so much from him, but I got to work with Tim Woods, who was great. Mr. Wrestling 2 was phenomenal. Some with Thunderbolt Patterson, and that's also was intriguing me about the black athlete and trying to figure out how to capitalize on working with the black athlete. And Thunderbolt had so much talent, but he carried so many burdens of the things that had happened to him in his life that he was unstable. You never knew what he was going to do.
Right.
And of course, Gary Hart and Bobby Duncan was my tag partner, who was like the Rock of Gibraltar, and Jerry Oates. I mean, we just had a good crew, and that was what a wrestling area it was. And so through all this, it was really great. And then Barnett wanted to come back out of Australia, so they sold him a part of the Georgia thing, and he took over Georgia. And then I went to Florida in '74 and booked Florida for Eddie. And Dusty Rhodes was down there, who I'd had some experience with Dusty already, and that's where I really developed Dusty into being an American Dream.
Right, exactly.
About after the first 2 weeks there, I had to fire his ass.
What happened?
Oh, as usual, Dusty with his ego and his bullshit was going behind my back to Eddie and second guessing everything. So I just fired his fat ass. I said, Eddie, either I'm going to be the booker or else let Dusty book it. Because when I got there, Dusty and Joe LeDuc had Texas Death Match and Canadian Death Matched each other and killed the territory. It was dead or shit. And so we got it going. And so I said, and I called him in and fired his ass. And he said, Bill, what? And I told him. He said, no. And he said, I'll do whatever you say. And I said, no more of this subversive shit. Are you going behind my back?
Right.
And then we went with it. And I mean, we turned him in. And I'm telling you, when he became the American Dream, I'll never forget him doing the interview. We had Pak Son Nam and Gary Hart, and the interview brought goose pimples to me. Of course, we had the greatest television commentator maybe in the history. The two best, I think, are Jim Ross and Gordon Soley. And Gordon Soley was at his peak, and Eddie's operation, he let me take total charge of an operation that was phenomenal. And I had phenomenal talent. Jack Briscoe was the world's champion, and Jack and I were friends, and Jack was phenomenal. Buddy Colt. We had Mike Graham was a young Mike Graham, and he had a lot to offer. I had so many guys I could pull in and get their participation.
Right.
Tony Charles was, you'd just love to see a match. To watch Danny Hodge and Tony Charles in a match, you'd pay just to see what they could do. It was so phenomenal. You get a standing ovation from the boys. And, of course, Dick Murdoch, good gosh. I mean, you talk about Eddie Graham came to me one day because I was having trouble because I had like 8 main events on the card in Tampa. And I'm having to figure a main event finish for 8 main events. And I said, Eddie, gosh, I just don't know what to do. I'm stymied. And he said, kid, he said, I have never seen anything like what you got. He says, you've got more talent than we ever had here. And he said, you got guys that we'd have died to have on the main event on the second and third match. He said, what a happy problem to have, trying to how to keep all these guys happy by challenging them in the ring.
Right.
And somehow we did it. And the business they were scalping tickets in Miami. We would sell out Tampa on a Tuesday, go to the Bayfront on Saturday, sell it out, and come back to Tampa on the Tuesday, sell it out. It was so hot. We put billboards up around town with Gary Hart and Paxson Nam with a bounty on Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. I mean, we had everything in the world going, and it was the most educational time. And Eddie Graham used to say to me, why are you down here? I was a high school dropout, and you're a college man. I said, I came to get my PhD. And that's what I thought I got. Eddie Graham taught me never to have your eggs in all in one basket. And we put together package shows. And so the package would draw more than back in the old days, they'd have one main event and a semifinal. And so everything was wrapped up in one main event. And if a guy had a death hold on the office, he may not even have the talent to draw, but he'd rather be the main event. So they really, Eddie Graham, I learned a new dimension under. So every place I was absorbing all this. And when I left Eddie Graham, I didn't need, I knew what to do.
Right. And
then I came back here and I told Leroy, I said, I'll come back with you, but we're going to kick Vern and Fritz out. They haven't contributed a damn thing. And it made them upset, but we finally, I just told them both we were going to retain all dividends and up mine and Leroy's salary, and because we were doing all the work, and if they wanted, and so finally they agreed to sell out. We paid them basically with their own retained earnings.
This is before 78 then, right?
Yeah, 78, I think that's when Leroy and I split. I just couldn't keep up with his bullshit and his drinking and his rages, and it's the saddest thing in the world. He was so talented. He was such a smart man. I learned, I guess, the when you believe in a supreme God like I do now, you realize that he put me in a position where I could learn, because with Leroy tearing you down every night, you had to be so ready and know where you were going with everything. Right. It taught me to always be ready and know where I was going, so I could always re-explain it. So when we broke up, then he filed an embezzlement lawsuit on me in the paper. Came out that they sued me for embezzlement. And I called him. I said, well, I guess I'm going to get your ranch free. And he said, why? I said, Leroy, you dumb shit. First of all, you hired the worst lawyer that could ever be in Tulsa. He's so stupid. And the next thing is you and Dorothy handled all the money. So I said, I never touched the money. You all signed the check. You collected the gate receipts. Matter of fact, I said, I was here a year before Leo and Voss and them showed me how you were stealing off the Tulsa gate. Then another year before, because you said you wouldn't do it anymore, before I realized you're stealing in Little Rock. And so I said, here you've put this in the paper. I have not taken one nickel from you. I don't handle the money. All I handle is the talent. So I'm going to get you for slander. And they dropped the lawsuit. So we split. And I took Mississippi and Louisiana, and he took what was up here. And, of course, I took Louisiana from, I think the most it ever grossed was $400,000 a year, and I took it to $4 million a year. And we just did business. And then I finally said, what the hell am I not up here? And I called him. I said, I'm coming back home. I said, I'll let you have a way of saving face. I'll buy you out. And so that's what I did. But I said, then you're behind on all the TV stations. You're going to pay them all off. So I have a goodwill with them. With the money I give you.
So this was now the start of Mid-South?
Well, yeah.
Around 78?
Well, Mid-South had already started but at 78 when I split with him, but then this was when I consolidated back up here.
Right. And I guess in the beginning you brought in the Freebirds and JYD. Who was some of your talent when you first started?
Well, I don't remember the breaks in time as such. The Freebirds, we found them, Gordy and Michael Hayes, and I wanted Gordy. I didn't ever think Michael was worth a shit in the ring.
Right.
But Gordy wouldn't leave Michael. So Michael came and we had him, and Michael was such a phenomenal talker and had such psychology on the mic, but he always wanted to wrestle. He had that pride. Michael has a lot of drive, and I love him to death, but to me, he was never what I needed in the ring. He didn't compliment Gordy in the ring. Gordy was so awesome. But then Gordy had to have Michael. They were codependent. So I'll never forget, Buck Robley was my booker then. I was going to trade him to Florida for 2 guys in Florida. And I said, the hell you are. We're going to find somebody to go with this team, and Michael's going to start just doing the interviewing and managing. And we got Buddy Roberts, who was perfect. And that team just took off as the Freebirds. And then JYD, he was in Calgary as Sylvester Ritter. We found him, brought him here. I saw his charisma. I named him, gave him his music, and did everything. And he was so dynamite. He wasn't a good worker. He was terrible. Matter of fact, funny thing, Ernie Ladd was then by that time, we got him going and we were selling out everywhere. But Ernie Ladd was having a big influence here. And Ernie one night said, I've got your new star, and he can't handle it. We put him with Scott Irwin, and Scott ran him ragged and his tongue was hanging out. He just can't compete. And I didn't understand Ernie completely, but Ernie was the greatest human being in my life, because Ernie, not only as a person, as an athlete, but as a fabulous human being, Ernie taught me about black. And all the things I was trying to learn at that time, a white man can never learn black. Right. Because we don't ever have to go through it. We can only observe it. So I learned so much from Ernie Ladd, and he had such a great heart, but he didn't want a black man to fail. So he was afraid JYD would fail. I fired Ernie for what he'd done to JYD that night with Scott Irwin. And Ernie got the message, and it never happened again. And of course, the rest is history. JYD became the biggest star I'd had. Ernie Ladd was one of the biggest stars I ever had. And, the sad thing in the aside, that when JY went to New York, and of course later got his problems with substance abuse that he never overcame, it was a bad parting for he and I. But I think when he died, and Buddy Landell asked me to write a eulogy for him, which I did, and I sat down, as I wrote it, I started crying, because I realized I never got to tell him how much I loved him. That the period of time I was around him, he was such a dynamite human being. The fact of how we ended our relationship was not near as important as the time we spent together. Right. I think I was starting to value life differently. And it was such a waste of time that this man that was so brilliant and JYD was a neat, special person. And then you also see the terrible battle that's fought when guys gets a hold of them that they can't whip. And so that was a great loss and that's when I think I've started realizing the difference in some of the relationships I had over the years. Because when you were in the business with your nose to the grindstone, you took things for granted, or you didn't have time to really look at the depth of what the relationship was. And so JYD is special, and that's why. But Ernie Ladd I knew was special. There are guys that have been in my life that just surpass so much. That Eddie Graham was special. When he committed suicide, it was such a loss. I can't tell you what a loss that was. Ole Anderson has been special in my life. We've battled at times, but Ole Anderson, there's times in our life where we had so much creativity flowing. I even came over, and I'm the one that told the Road Warriors to cut their hair and paint their faces, which made them a team. So, I mean, Ole Anderson, we've had our problems. Hiro Matsuda, I can just go on. These guys touch my life to a deeper level than sometimes I realize.
All right. What were some of your early goals with Mid-South Championship Wrestling? Where did you want to see the company?
Initially your goal is just to survive. Right. Then you start making money. And then I think when you find that you've done something that later now has become noted by history, I don't think you knew you were doing it at the time. Although I had the same idea Vince McMahon had and tried to get Kenny National Services. I met with him to try to get him to bankroll me to do what he had clear back while Eddie Graham was still alive. So I knew that I could take it nationally, and I knew it could be big because we had something nobody had. See, when you had a promotion like the East Coast where you had all the population anyway, you could bore the shit out of people and still draw money because you had so many people to draw from.
Right.
Whereas I had such a small amount of population that my theory was to excite them so much that they want to watch it every week and will come. So we had some TVs that we had 60% shares of the audience. Alexandria, Louisiana, places like that. I mean, that's why our show was so damn good. You never knew what was going to happen on it, but we gave you main event matches. And I'd often put the guys that were against each other on the show, they're going to be out there drawing the money, because if they gave you enough, you'd still want to see them.
Right.
So that was a revelation. But I don't know. I think that when you're doing what you enjoy, that the benefits just take care of themselves. I don't think I had long range plans. I was just doing and evolving. And I saw the business a certain way. I wanted respect for the business. I wanted the wrestlers to respect the business. I wanted the fans to respect the business. So if a wrestler came in with me and left bad checks or left bad debts, I took it out of his money. And we paid him because he could go on. But we were here and we wanted to build respect for our industry. So we always demanded respect for our industry. And I liked athletes. I like guys that could wrestle. I like tough guys.
Right.
I want to tell you, tough guys are not near the problem as the whining bastards that are workers. Because the whining bastards that are workers can't whip anybody. They just cry and whine and lay down the ring or leave. The tough guy will tell you right to your face what he will or won't do, and then he'll go do it, and he'll bust his ass to do it. I'll tell you, like Orndorff. Orndorff battled me every day he was here, but he was such a unique piece of talent. He's a tough guy. Couldn't wrestle that well. We stretched his ass down in Florida when he came, but Eddie Graham wouldn't let us hurt him because he's a friend of Mike's. But you saw he had guts. Orndorff was an athlete. He had guts. But he argued and fought me all the time.
Right.
And I'll never forget, I had him and Ted Dibiase scheduled to do an hour of Broadway. Both of them were baby faces in Jackson, Mississippi. And they should have seen the whining. Oh, you're going to kill our careers. This, and we can't do that. We can't go an hour that way. Yeah. And I said, oh, well, you two pussies. Are you babies? I said, let me give you a finish that if you can't do it, you can use it, but you can't use it till 5 minutes till the end of the hour. But I want this. This is what I want, but here's a finish.
Right.
But if you two sissies can't do this and you chicken shit out, then go ahead and cop it and do this. Well, that got them so damn mad at me. They were so mad at me. They went out there and they tore the joint down. They tore the joint down. They could have gone 2 hours. But they grew. They both grew that night because they realized, gosh damn it, we can do it. We can do it. And it changed both of them. And they both know it now. They both know that was a very pivotal. Paul Orndorff called me years later after he was in New York. And he said, I was so damn mad at you, I didn't realize how much you taught me till I got away from you. Same thing with Hanson and Goodish. They were tag teamers, and they were entertaining each other. I split them up, and they gave me their notice. I said, since you're going to give me 4 weeks notice, no 2. I said, no 4, I'll take all your money.
Right.
Yeah. Then while you're here, you're going to work the singles the way I want you to work them because you're both going to be big stars, but you're holding each other back. And Hanson got there a lot quicker, and then Goodish got there, and Goodish became a big star too. The problem with Goodish was his word was no good. And he'd come into a town and he'd draw money and then he'd hijack the promoter. And bless his heart, then he got murdered in Puerto Rico.
Right.
But Frank Goodish was a fun to be around. And I maintained a friendship with him all along. Just wouldn't use him anymore when his word came no good.
I guess getting back to Mid-South, let's see. You had $100,000 houses in New Orleans and stuff like that. I mean,
yeah, the first time we ran the Superdome was a big jump. Well, that was a big jump for us. And we got in a partnership with a guy named Seymour Smith who owned a little UHF television station. And he wanted to try this. And so we went on partnership with him on the Dome. Nervous wrecks. Leroy said it'd never work. Leroy was just bitching. And I think the first one did $87,000, which was unheard of for us. And Ernie Ladd was on it with a guy named Ray Candy. And Ernie told me that he'd make Ray Candy draw money. And I said, you can't. Ray is the nicest guy in the world, but he won't draw any money. And Ernie fooled me. Ray Candy drew money. And we had a great card on there. So Ernie sometimes and Dickie Murdoch would come to the office, and I'd let them sneak in and sit down without Leroy knowing it so they could hear what I'm having to go through with Leroy. So Grizzly was there. Grizzly Smith was there. And I'll never forget Ernie was sitting there. And Leroy said, well, Grizz, what do you think of New Orleans? What do you think of that Superdome? Well, I thought Leroy'd be overjoyed. We'd set a new standard. We'd done something that'd never been done here. And Grizz says, well, boss, what'd you think of it? He said, I thought there was too many niggers on the card and too many niggers in the audience. What do you think, Grizz? And Ernie's sitting right there.
All right.
And Grizz said, boss, he said, I think it's called The Money is Green. And it's the most green we've ever seen. So Ernie could see the things that I was going through. That's why it hurt me so bad at WCW when that jerk off for some Pittsburgh newspaper wrote Hank Aaron a damn letter saying I was a racist.
Right.
Hell, I believed in the black athlete. Always have. I did more for the black athlete in wrestling than had been done to that point or still has been done. By putting them not on the card in main events, but in positions of responsibility and importance in my company. And they didn't get it because they're black. They got it because of who they were as a human being. They earned it. Ernie Ladd, or when I went there, Ron Simmons. But Brenda Smith, I made her the office manager there because she knew more about what was going on and was a straight shooter.
Right.
And then for somebody to buy that garbage, which, by the way, had been asked me before Bill Shaw ever hired me, what a crock of shit. But that's the typical of Turner. It's all lies and backstabbing.
We're going to get into all that, definitely. All right. I guess Jim Cornette came in with the Midnight Express.
That's a great story. My territory was down, because you get in the trees and you can't see the forest. So I called my friend Jerry Jarrett and I asked him and Lawler, I said, why don't you guys come over and just watch one of my TV shows and tell me what's wrong? Because generally I could go in a place I knew and pick it apart. I used to go in and go into Georgia. Ole'd call me or Jim Barnett would call me and I'd go into Georgia, which I own part of. Right. And I'd see what Ole was doing wrong and I could get him back on track. It wasn't because you're trying, so sometimes you're missing it. So Lawler and Jarrett came to the TV taping at the Irishman Neal Boys Club in Shreveport, and they watched the taping. And then they came in afterwards, and I said, well, let's go get an ID. What'd you think? They said, where's all the blowjobs? I said, what? Blowjobs? Let the boys take care of that. That's not what I brought you over here. I want to go eat, and I want you all to tell me what's the matter with my territory. And he said, where's all the blowjobs? I said, I'm missing it. He said, Bill, you've got the toughest athletes here. You're down to your hardcore base of fans, but there's nobody that's bringing the young girls. And where the young girls are, the young guys are. To have a healthy mix, you got to have a mixture. And you don't have it. You got Hacksaw Duggan, you got JYD, you got Dibiase, you got Dr. Death, you got Hercules Hernandez, you got guys that could whip everybody out here. Right. You don't. So I said, okay, I want to come over. He said, why don't we work a trade? Why don't you come over and look at some of my talent and I'll look at some of your talent? So I went to Memphis and he had a young guy named Jim Cornette and I was just mesmerized by him. And then he had Bobby Eaton was in one match and Dennis Condrey was in another match. They weren't even teamed. And Jarrett said, would you take this Cornette for me? He said, I want to keep Jimmy. The manager that was Jimmy Hart. He said, I want to keep him. I need to get rid of Cornette. And he said, and I don't have anything for Eaton and this other guy to do. I said, you'll give me them? He said, yep. And then we were talking about Stan Lane and his partner, who were the blondes that were doing so
fabulous ones. Kern and Lane.
Yeah, and I was really interested in them, but he wouldn't let me have them. But he had Morton and Gibson doing nothing, and he gave me them. That was the greatest trip I'd ever taken. Then he came over, and I think he picked out of my group Rick Rude, who was a young rookie at the time, and somebody else, and he took them. Well, we took the videos and came and we put Cornette and Condrey and them together and made the Midnight Express. I mean, you guys remember that? Rock and Roll Express was Ricky and Robert, but then the Midnight Express was Cornette and them.
Right.
And I'm telling you, we electrified this place. And plus, he had a little bitty booker over there named Bill Dundee, and he didn't have a place for Dundee. And so I made a deal with Dundee to come over and help me with the book, except I wouldn't let him wrestle because Dundee's got the greatest ego in the world, and he'd want to beat Andre the Giant when he's less than 6 feet tall himself. But he had the most fertile mind.
All right.
And we had a run that was unreal. And Dundee was phenomenal. And, of course, Jimmy Cornette was mind-boggling. And Bobby Eaton. What could you say about Bobby Eaton? He could do it all. And then Condrey fit. And then Ricky Morton. Hoot Gibson or Robert Gibson was good, but Robert was just okay. Ricky Morton could make any match.
Right.
And so we had these guys, and that was like we had the icing on the cake. And we could do all the stuff we needed to do. And we blew this thing open, and the teeny boppers and everybody were coming. And we still had the tough guys. So I had to be careful how I booked them or book them with guys that would work with them.
Right.
And
Jed Magnum come in.
Yeah, we had Magnum, and we converted Magnum. We dressed him up and started getting him an image and everything else. And he was a fine kid, and we had him for a while. But then he left and went to the Carolinas, and was doing good there. And so we just blew the doors off here.
So the Fantastics came in.
Fantastics, we tried to follow Rick. They could never follow Ricky and Robert. They were good, but they couldn't take it to the level of what we're. You don't have that many Ricky Mortons. Ricky Morton
is an awesome babyface.
Yeah, I mean, he can do it all. There's a lot of guys that can do the mechanics, but don't have the feel for the match. And there's a big difference. Like, for instance, Ted Dibiase. I called him my catalyst. I wanted him in any match. Ted Dibiase by himself would never draw the biggest bucks in the business. But Ted Dibiase in the match always made the match. Duggan is the kind of guy that could draw money, but Duggan could get so screwed up he's not working with the guys right. I had a hell of an angle here one time with Dibiase and Duggan that was a classic, the best dressed man angle, and every town it's going in, it was going down. And I went and watched, and then I saw why, and I had to chew Duggan's ass. He's guzzling Dibiase. And Dibiase's not going to fight Duggan for getting his own part of the match. Dibiase's just going to go along with it, but it's killing the towns.
Right.
But then as far as heart, you want a guy like Duggan. I mean, he split his head speared his own head in Houston, where it penetrated the skull with this damn turnbuckle. He goes to the hospital, sewed it up. He never missed a show. And finally, his wife calls me and said, I don't know if he can make it tonight. He can't even shut his eyes. I said, why? He said, his head is so swollen and it's all puffy. I said, he's got blood poisoning. Get him to the hospital. But if Duggan, with his way, he'd make it if it was going through fire.
All right.
So you had guys that believed in making it. Matter of fact, my rule here was, I don't care if you get in a fight out in public. If you lose, you're fired.
Right.
So if a guy came here and got in a fight, one guy did, a top hand, and I fired his ass. I looked at his hands, and I said, you didn't throw any punches. You were a catcher, not a hitter. You're fired. That's just, if you're going to go out and get in fights, then you better make sure the business wins.
Who was that?
No, let's don't do
okay.
that.
Jack Victor was telling us something about that. I don't know. Let's see. How did Mid-South turn into UWF? Eventually,
we had to have that because when we started going nationwide, we saw that what Vince was doing, we had to too, and Mid-South had the feel to the advertisers of being regional, so we had to do something that was national, and we got going pretty good. Let me tell you, Mid-South didn't get beat. Every time, Vince will tell you, every time he came here, we kicked his ass. We embarrassed him. What beat us was the oil thing. When the oil crunch hit and wiped out the oil states, that's what beat us. It had nothing to do with our ability to promote. We could beat anybody. We had the highest rated show everywhere it was ever played against anybody.
How did you first syndicate UWF?
Strictly, we had a syndicator that Jim came on in Dallas, and again, that guy was doing a good job, and the oil crunch wiped him out and wiped the guy that was his backer out. This guy owned hotels and everything, and when they all went broke, he went broke too. But we were well on the road to, it was all the old-fashioned way. We did the bartering and the syndication, and most of our commercials were the per inquiry type of commercial, same way that Ted Turner built his station. And we had good results and everything. I'm telling you, we were just doing fine. And then all of a sudden, when that thing hit, the realization of that oil thing, when the bottom dropped out of oil, it just like a spigot turned it off. And I started losing $50,000 every week. And that wasn't monopoly money. That's out of my pocket. And that's a hell of a deal. But we maintained our contracts with our talent. We paid our talent. We kept on going. But I finally got to the point where I realized I had to sell it.
Right. This is back in 86.
86, 87.
Yeah. Before you even get into that period, but you had some of the greatest talent of all time in the UWF, and it's definitely some of the most compelling TV and all.
Sting, that's another one we missed. Sting was a young guy. He was partnered with a guy that was a real
Ultimate
jerk.
Warrior.
Yeah,
Jim Howard.
He was a piece of shit. But Sting had that something about him, and when Hellwig and Sting got upset and walked out on me, I told Grizzly, go get Sting and have him come back.
Right.
I didn't want the other guy. And Sting was scared to death. I booked him with me in Tulsa, and Sting thought then I was going to beat him up.
Right.
And he says, is there a couple of high spots I'd like to do? Can I call a couple in the ring? I said, sure, call the high spots that you think will fit your match well. But Sting told me later, he says, I was so scared that night. And I said, I was not angry at you, or I wouldn't have you back. I didn't bring you back to beat you up.
Right.
I brought you back because I saw what you had. And I still have a lot of respect for Sting.
I'm going to go down a list of names. I guess give me your opinions on him. Eddie Gilbert.
Eddie Gilbert was a talented kid. And Eddie and I was intrigued with his talent, just always off wrong on the timing. And then I was even going to bring Eddie into WCW, but he kept destroying that by running his mouth. I kept saying, be quiet, Eddie. I'm going to bring you in here and get you started, because I knew Eddie needed somebody that was strong to be around him, that could lead him and capitalize on his talent, because Eddie would do anything in the ring. He had a gift, but he just couldn't overcome his own self-destruction.
Missy Hyatt.
Oh, Missy, we just kind of had to have Missy. I don't think Missy added one damn thing except problems. Let's see, I can't remember who she first came here with, but I mean, every time she'd break up and start going with somebody else, she'd have a headache and a problem. Missy never was one of my favorite ones at all. She was just part of the neck of where the thing was transitioning to. I don't think it adds or takes away one thing. I think we could have never had her done just as well. I don't think she added anything.
John Tatum and Jack Victor.
Tatum was the one that had Missy, wasn't he?
Right.
I don't even remember Tatum very well. I remember Tatum had a problem, seemed like, and then he cost me. I thought, oh yeah, I got in a bad lawsuit over him being under the influence and having a major car wreck that killed somebody. So that's my memory of Tatum. I wouldn't even recognize him if I saw him, so I didn't think much of him. Jack Victory was a neat guy. I like Jack Victory.
He's still in ECW now. Bill Irwin?
Well, I knew Scott and I knew Bill. And Scott Irwin was a neat guy. As like I said, the funny thing that had happened with Ernie Ladd, that was just Scott Irwin and that was just Ernie. But Scott Irwin would give you all he could out there. And Bill, too. I don't think Bill ever found his niche. I think Ken Lusk was able to use him more in Dallas than I was. But Bill, I never had a problem with Bill. I thought Bill always gave me all he had out there.
Right. What do you think about the Von Erichs tragedy?
You just said it. That's a tragedy. I don't think their dad ever came to grips with the fact that they were drug addicts. I've seen them since they were kids, and he couldn't face it. And one of his best friends told him they were on drugs, and he wouldn't speak to him for 2 years. And when he finally realized it, he called me and said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, the first thing is you've got to confront it, but you've got to love them. You got to try to love them through it, but you've got to confront it. You've got to get them off that stuff. And you can't keep giving them everything in the world and rewarding them. And it was a tragedy. I mean, they'd come to town sometime, be so zonked and zoned out, they didn't even know where they were at. Sometimes one of them was supposed to be in the main event, be in the ring, and go find him in the public bathroom sitting in a lotus position, telling his wife how much he loved her or some stupid thing like that. I mean, and so the guys really had a hard time with them because they were so whacked. And the bad thing was that the business was tolerating it. That's the bad thing, when you tolerate it. So finally, I broke my partnership with Fritz over it in the towns we were, just because I wasn't going to deal with these kids anymore.
All right. How did you get introduced to Jim Ross?
Oh, Jim, I can't remember how. He was a kid in college, and we hired him. I think he just wanted to be a referee so bad. We hired him as a referee. And then even when I left and went to Georgia and Florida, he stayed and worked around Leroy a lot. And I could see he had a real desire for the business. He was a talented guy. He was a very intelligent guy. And so when I came back, he was working in radio. And the thing that impressed me about Jim with the radio, he would sell. He'd go out to sell somebody, and he'd tell them how to take the spots he was selling and make them money, because he understood it from a retail aspect, because he used to have his own retail store in the little town that he grew up in. And so Jim and I got to talking, and we got him to come back in the business. And then he wanted to be my commentator. We phased him into that. I had Boyd Pierce, and Boyd was a wonderful, wonderful guy. But when we went to the bigger level, Boyd was limited because he was had the vernacular.
Right.
But I was doing all the commentary basically that had meaning. And the only reason I ever did the commentary is because I knew what I wanted the people to feel or to react or to know about the guy. So I could point it right on the guy the way I wanted it, whereas most commentators couldn't because they'd never been in the ring. And I would not tolerate a commentator that would try to get himself over instead of the wrestler over. So then Jim became our commentator, and Jim knew what I expected, and that's the what Jim then believed too. And he became so good at it. And then I pulled completely out. Almost, I'd do a little bit, and then we got Jim and Michael Hayes doing it, which had good chemistry. So I didn't have to do much of it, which was fine with me. I was always trying to pull myself out. Every now and then they would talk me into coming out of retirement to shoot an angle because we knew it would draw such money. But Jim Ross could do anything. He could syndicate. I used to build my relationships with my TV managers or TV owners and do my own contracts. And then Jim started doing it. And so he did the syndication, and we had built a little staff around him. So he was very, very good. Still is.
What were some of your favorite angles that you booked in UWF?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. I don't remember. The Best Dressed Man was a great angle with Dibiase and Duggan. Of course, the Cornette angle, the diaper, the JYD angle where they blinded JYD was probably one of the all-time great angles that we capitalized on for so long. It's hard for me to remember the angles. There were so many, and we
Eddie
always
Gilbert,
had some.
They did the thing with you and Eddie Gilbert with the Korchenko and the Blade Runners blocked the ring.
The shovel.
Yeah. Oh, the
And
guy
they
in
buried
Jackson, Mississippi. Yeah, where he just wasn't my kind of guy, and I got mad at him, and he ran out of the ring. He tried to get the shovel from Eddie. Eddie wouldn't give him the shovel. I still had the high ground. I had my belt with that big buckle, but that shovel would have been a problem. And I guess he got his dog and his kid and his wife and hit the truck, and we never saw him again. But that was just one of those things. Sometimes I guess I've had a little bit of a temper in my day.
You were definitely one of the first promotions to use music videos and women in professional wrestling.
Well, Jarrett was doing it too.
Right.
Jerry Jarrett. I'm gonna tell you, Jarrett's a brilliant guy, and I think a bad thing is that Jerry and I didn't spend more time with each other because we really had a great rapport together. Jerry was just very insecure sometimes and would read things the wrong way, but he'll be the first to tell you that. Jerry called me years later after one deal. He was telling everybody I stole his cornet and all that talent from him instead of him begging me to take them, which is the truth is he begged me to take them. He later called me and said, I don't know what happened or why I did that. So I still have nothing but respect for Jerry Jarrett. And he was living in that Nashville area, and he started messing with the videos and stuff. We just brought it here and took it to another level. And Joel was my son Joel was very talented at putting that stuff together and editing it. And but I'd also learned back into editing footage under Eddie Graham in Florida with the old film footage. That was just a lot harder than doing it by videotape.
Did you ever have any trouble with any of the TV stations airing footage as far as like the barbed wire match you guys did with the Sheep Herders and the Fantastics? Not because it was so graphic.
That may have been after we got bigger, and that would have been more in Jim Ross's department. I didn't have trouble. I used to use a lot of things that predid that for the TV station. I might run a slide up in the middle of something saying this is just too graphic, it got out of hand, and wouldn't show it myself,
Right.
which was the greatest angle of all because I had done it in the best interest of the television station and made the people want to see it more.
Right.
But no, we didn't have anything. I didn't let anything happen that was going to be so bad I couldn't air it.
A lot of your TV shows ended, I guess, without finishes or.
Well, yeah.
I mean, do you think that hurt?
No,
or helped?
hell no.
Right. People tune in for next week.
Sure, because number one, it made it more real. I mean, how do you get all these matches that are booked and they're one fall or 15 minute or one fall 20 minute or something like, and then you get 6 of them in on every TV show.
Right.
Whereas mine were booked one fall or 10 minutes, and the last ones were all one fall or TV time remaining. Well, if it's TV time remaining, how do you always figure with 1 minute left on TV, the match is over?
All right.
So hell, but we didn't just over it like it just went off the air. Our journey was awfully exciting at the time it went off the air, and it pissed people off.
Right.
But the bottom line is they wanted to see it, so they tuned back in. And sometimes we would come back and say, this is how that match finished last week.
Right.
So it just depended. The key thing we tried to do is make our show so valuable that a fan tuning in knew he would get more than his money's worth. The same was my theory about the house matches. I think a fan has to always get more than their money's worth, that they have to go home thinking they got a value.
One of your best hours was when you did every title change in 1 hour.
Yeah. we did some fun things, and I had Vince talked into, when I was back there, into switching the title into Madison Square Garden. Because he said, Madison Square Garden's still a mecca. Only time you change is on one of your big pay-per-views. Let's do it in Madison Square Garden. And he was going to do it, but then, then it got, I think one of his stars that was involved in it then got put in the hospital. That was a great one. They had 3 wrestling stars in the same car, got their ass whipped by 9 guys in some town, and telling me, now 3 guys would have got fired.
Right. Because
first of all, they were so zonked on drugs, they didn't know what day it was, is why they got their ass whipped. But if I had 3 top stars, 9 guys could whip 3. If you had the town couldn't whip 3 of my guys.
Right.
Their asses would have been fired. So, but Vince had lost control of his business at that time.
And he thought it would
and the inmates were running the asylum. And that's what's happening in the business today. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to realize you still got a human factor.
Right.
And the factor is, did it get performed? You can lay out something. Or let me tell you, the beautiful thing about wrestling is oftentimes what we think is going to work on paper doesn't work. The box office is the final defining line, as long as your television's not preempted or there's not a major ice storm down here or a hurricane or something that hit me once in New Orleans when I had a Superdome. But yeah, you can have run something too far. Or I'll tell you another thing, you can actually go beyond the bounds, and the people would with heat, and it's got heat for heat's sake, and it doesn't react. Now today is so different because they've re-educated the people a different way. And so I don't think you could ever recapture the psychology of the business that there used to be. But yeah, because you didn't go out there, if every angle worked, you'd never have cycles in your business.
Right.
So sometimes you would get as much as you could out of every angle. And that was one of my strengths, was to be able to carry something and not just drop it. Some guys like Dusty Rhodes is a phenomenal mind, but if he gets bored, he just drops something. Or Jim Barnett would just drop something, and then there was no rhyme or reason to start something else. Well, I think the key thing is you got to keep some continuity. So the fan that's tuning in didn't just, well, what happened to that? There's got to be a reason for it to go away. So, you always have that problem of whether it's going to be executed right or that's what the fans want to see. And so you try to get as much as you can out of people. Sometimes you go too far. And then you'd have to start over. So when you had to start over, I think it was important just to sit down and start building some people and get some good, solid stuff. And oftentimes you didn't know what angle was going to work. You didn't know what the charisma was going to be. Sometimes it just happened that you started seeing it. You might see it that's why we analyzed it so close and worked on it so close. And that's why I always had a booking committee.
Right. Because
I could incorporate the minds that I wanted to bring out and to challenge and draw them out.
Who was booking for you? Mantell, was it?
Well, Mantell just didn't do a real good job of booking for me. And as a matter of fact, later Mantell turned out to be one of the biggest thieves in my life. He helped swindle me out of quite a bit of money. But Mantell was a decent booker, but he wasn't the best booker. We had some awfully good talent at the time. I had the best booker for me was Ernie Ladd or Bill Dundee, was 2 of the best that I remember that had a good run. I would figure a booker would last me about a year, and then he would hit the wall because I would demand so much.
Right.
And so then he had to get out, and then I could bring him back. And that's a painful thing. It's always painful to get rid of talent or bookers that you become very attached with, and you've seen that they'll give you their all. But there's a time when you have to change. I don't give a damn if it's chocolate cake. You don't want to eat it every day of every week. And you need to change talent. That's one of the things that hurt the big new business for so long is, where's the new talent? It's stagnant.
Right.
And the bad thing is when you're on a nationwide hookup, everybody sees everything you got every week.
Did Vince try to steal a lot of your talent back in '86? I know Dibiase left.
Well, he claims he didn't, but he did. And the bad thing is he could pay him so much more money than I could. And his dad had a real unique way of working that was very, very good. And I think Vince, if he had hindsight, that he wouldn't have driven everybody out of business because he could have used a feeder system. And his dad was basically that way. His dad would say, well, look, you got Waldo Von Erich, and I want him to start in Madison Square Garden, but I need 4 TVs on him before he starts. I'd like him to start here, here, and here. And he'd give you that plenty of time. Well, I could go pitch a bitch, but it wasn't going to change. I couldn't make Waldo as much money as the senior was. So the good thing is he stroked me by calling me like he was just consulting with me, but he'd already made up his mind. So I always cooperated because I knew that I didn't have any way to win. And by cooperating, he said, well, look, you've always been so good. Let me give you an extra week on Andre. And he'd give me an extra week on Andre. Well, hell, that's an extra week of sellouts.
Right.
So he'd give you something for the cooperation. So it was really smooth. Vince Jr. Had his dream, and his dream has certainly been effective. And he's a tremendously effective guy. He and I discussed sometimes, and I thought we got along very good the 3 months I was back there with him. I got to know him as a person. His problem is he has a hard time delegating too. He wants to do it all himself. And I wasn't willing just to be a flunky. But I teased him one time, said there's only room for one Titan at Titan Sports.
Right.
But he is a genius. And I said, you see, if we really had it right, you would have all these farm teams still operating. And then you would have your pick of talent. You'd have places to go put your talent when you'd used them up and bring them back. And I don't know how exactly that would work in the work, but it was great theory. And we kind of agreed upon that there needed to be a place. Because the bottom line is, when I was at WCW even, is the new talent doesn't know how to work.
Right.
And you can't learn in 5-minute matches. So that's when I created that on the road thing close by where we could take talent out and stick them in 20-minute matches so they'd start learning how to work.
Right. And
they were amazed at how they grew. They were just amazed.
Did you, before UWF folded or went out of business, you sold it to Crockett. Did you have a lot of conversations with Vince before?
You mean about that? Well, yeah. I guess you looped into that deal. That was kind of a coup. I knew that my ass was going out of business because I couldn't survive the oil crisis. And this, I mean, when all entertainment quit coming to the oil states, which was Louisiana, Texas, and Oklahoma, and of course Arkansas, Mississippi. Country western shows canceled, rock and roll canceled because it was dead. There was no money. You had banks going broke. Braniff Airlines went broke, and so and foreclosures of land, and so I called Vince and went back east to visit with him and said, "Well, I've got enough damage," which was true, to do a pretty darn good federal antitrust suit.
Right.
And I had a law firm in New Orleans that wanted to try it, and they would have tried it there, which was my grounds. And if you've ever, New Orleans is the only state that's under the Napoleonic Code, so you have a lot of advantages politically. And I said, so if you buy me out, I won't file it. And he said, if you want to work together with me, sell yours and come to work with me. So I didn't like that deal, but I can't blame him for where he was. He just called it. He said, go to court, which we could have done. We probably could have won. But that'd have been a 2 to 3 year deal, and I'm losing $50,000 a week at the time. So then Jim Ross called Crockett and said, Vince is about to buy Bill Watts. You're number 2. We were number 3 in size. He said, if he buys Bill Watts, you're finished. But why don't you buy him? And that's how we got Crockett to the table. And Crockett bought. And Crockett had the means with what we gave him to have really done it. I just didn't realize Jimmy Crockett didn't have the real growth and ability to run a big company. He had Dusty bankrupted him. And Dusty, with all his talent, doesn't know how to make something have a bottom line. There's no territory he's ever run that hadn't had fiscal problems, because Dusty doesn't know anything about bottom line. All he knows is spend and do. And you have to have a balance. You have to be able to have a bottom line. That's what I was always very good at. My territory probably made more net than any territory in the United States.
Were you offered a position in Crockett, or you just wanted out of the business? No,
as a consultant. And I wouldn't have fit there with Crockett's ego and Dusty's ego and everything. And I wanted out. But there was a lot of things happening in my life spiritually at the time. Since 1984, I had started, God had come into my life, and I started reading the scriptures, and I finally came to the realization that what I was doing was against my faith, that I believe in Jesus Christ, and I could not continue to promote violence, sex, knowing that I was promoting violence and sex. Now today, it's triple. It's violence, sex, and drugs. Right. Because they're all promoting violence, sex, and drugs. I mean, when you don't drug test guys and you use known druggers, you're promoting drugs. And certainly Turner Broadcasting is when I was there, they wanted me to clean it up. We instituted a drug policy and tested it, and had 5 guys positive, so they wouldn't sign the policy. And I think anybody can look at their show and see you can sure pick out the guys that are still roided to the max. And
Right.
they certainly got guys that flunked the drug tests for Vince. They go right to work for there. So, I mean, Vince is doing a better job of policing drugs now than any of the majors that I'm aware of.
Do you think when NWA took all your talent that they missed a boat with doing an interpromotional feud as far
Yes, yes, that's what the whole basis was. One thing I learned about the Georgia War was Gunkel was selling out and we were selling out in Atlanta, and it created a bigger awareness of wrestling. And when Dibiase called me about the NWO thing at WCW, and I said, yes, yeah, create your own competition,
Right.
and it'll stimulate your business. And that's what NWO did. Then Vince copied it
Right.
at WWF. So, yeah, that's what Crockett was supposed to do. But Dusty's ego couldn't handle it. You know, it just was, I mean, how stupid can you be that you go buy a jet that carries 5 passengers in the wrestling business? That doesn't even make sense. If you got two airplanes, you don't need a 5-passenger airplane in the wrestling business. And I owned a Phillips 66 fixed base. I could have got Crockett's special deals on aviation fuel.
Right.
And he just drew into himself because he couldn't cope.
Do you think it was basically a fear of if they started an interpromotional feud that their guys had to look stronger than UWF guys?
Oh, I don't know what their problem was. Hell, he owned them both.
Right.
If you own them both, what do you care?
Right.
It's supposed to be about the bottom line, isn't it? So, I mean, and you sure control the outcome, don't you?
Exactly.
And so if there's somebody over here that are looking stronger, you can just have somebody buy them out, and all of a sudden they're over here, can't you?
Right.
Isn't that what the NWO does?
Right.
So, I mean, it's a work. But they shot with it as far as egos, and Crockett went broke.
Right. What did you do after that, after 87 until 92?
I had a fixed base operation, but it was the wrong time for that too with the oil crunch, because all of your major corporations, when the oil prices went to heck, first thing they get rid of is their flight department. So I sold that, and then I was just messing around doing different things, and then I went back. I guess it's like anything else. Even though I was also going through my trail of my faith. And you see something and you realize something, but then you get scared and you think, well, I'm a dinosaur. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? I need something that's exciting me in my life. And I spent my life in wrestling. So when the WCW thing came up, and it seemed like a good thing. But what came back on me was all the things I was trying to get out of my life, plus to go into Turner Broadcasting, which is such a clusterfuck, and have these guys that have their own agendas. And I was supposed to be given total autonomy. Instead, I couldn't fire anybody that was in the main office. They all had an angel hidden somewhere in these 30 companies up there. And so pretty soon you're spending more time pulling the arrows out of your back than doing your work. You're having to defend yourself all the time. And everybody's got a different agenda.
How'd you get in there in the first place? How did that come about in 92?
Ted Turner's personal attorney, Tinch Cox. And Ted had that deal with me that he screwed me out of, but he knew I could run the wrestling business. The Crockett thing with Ted and Vince has screwed me out of my deal. I already had a deal with Ted, and we were going to co-promote together worldwide. And he put my show on, and he never was locked in and still outrated his shows. And I bought an airplane so I could start flying my staff back and forth to Atlanta, and we were going to promote. But Vince had the contract and wouldn't give the contract up. So Ted called me and said, don't worry, I got to get him off. It'll take me a few weeks for my legal department, but everything's solid. The next thing I know, there was a deal that was purported to be that Crockett and Turner read into each other at the yacht club, and Crockett said, look, I want that deal Watts has got. I'll go buy Vince out. I'll give Vince $1 million and get rid of him for you if you'll let me take it over. And that's supposedly how it happened. So I got screwed.
Right.
So, but anyway, when I came back to work through that, and I met with Ted, and everything was going to be all right, but then Ted is too insulated, and I had to go through a guy named Bill Shaw, who's, as far as wrestling is concerned, is a complete idiot, and always had his own hidden agenda, and was so subversive. And there was a neat guy there named Bob Dew that was supposed to work with me for a year, and then I was supposed to run everything. Bob was a neat guy. He was president of the Omni. And Bob, though, at that time had a lot of freedom, and he was not there a lot. So we had all these different things going on, but I couldn't get rid of the bottom line is they asked me if I could keep the losses under $8 million.
Right, I know that.
And I brought it in, I think $400,000 or $800,000 loss which blew them away. The accountant down there I was wanting to fire kept telling them I was going to go over $8 million. Instead of bringing in for $800,000 or $400,000, they wouldn't even write a letter of commendation about that. That's how screwed up that place was, and it was just a clusterfuck.
When you first got in there, a lot of guys were pissed that you came in there because they all had contract negotiations with Kip Fry, and then I guess Arn Anderson.
Yeah, they stupid contracts, and agents and Turner Broadcasting's legal staff is all lawyers that have generally failed in general practice. They can't get a job anywhere else, so they go to work for Turner Broadcasting, and they don't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, if you looked at the contracts that the wrestlers had, you'd think that the wrestlers and their agent wrote the contract, and Turner Broadcasting just rolled over and honored it.
Right.
They were that one-sided and stupid. And you had to come back somewhere to where there was a balance and where that the athlete was held accountable. So we started doing cycles based on the cycles on television, and we had ways of getting out of the contracts. You can't have a contract that you're just paying all the money and there's no way out of it, and the guy doesn't have to perform. I mean, hell, the guys had days off. They had this, they had that, and I don't mind the days off, but if you're running a company, you've got to have the ability to know who you've got to put together to make things go.
What were some of the first things you did as far as changing things around there?
I don't remember. I think cycles and different contracts. We were going to do drug testing. We wanted to clean that up. We did some things about the ring where we took away the mats on the floor. We stopped them from coming off the top rope or the top turnbuckle. Didn't stop it, made it a disqualification.
Right.
Which put some mystery in it.
Right.
And we did a lot of things, and we made sure that the guys were going back and rugged out there and hooking it up and really busting their ass out there. We had some things going the right directions, and then we had to try to re-educate the TBS people who really didn't want wrestling. They'd rather replace it with a movie, except let me tell you, wrestling is the only thing Ted Turner's had on his station that outrates his station average. And so Ted's smart enough not to let him get rid of it. But we had a lot of people that didn't want wrestling.
Was it hard getting the boys to listen to you with all the new rules?
Yeah, sure. It was not so much the rules. They didn't mind the shit. The boys could go. It was just the turmoil of certain guys that had big fat contracts that weren't doing anything, or guys that you needed to get rid of.
Right.
You just didn't need them, or guys that were on roids and raging and hurting people and stuff like. Yeah, Scotty Steiner, Rick Steiner, I think is a quality guy. Scotty is not near, to me, he's a legend in his own mind. And he's a problem. He's a real problem because he doesn't mind. He'll hurt people. He intimidates the shit out of them. And he's just not that good. I wanted to turn him heel. I thought he'd been the greatest heel in the world, which later was true, right? He was a good heel. He was a terrible babyface. And he wanted to outshine his brother, which I didn't want him doing. I wanted Rick to be the key guy because I knew I could count on Rick. But Rick is more loyal to blood than to anything else. Plus, the guys were right in the long run because I wasn't going to last there, and they knew they were going to get their own way. So Scotty Steiner was a problem.
How did you get the idea of putting the belt on Ron Simmons?
Great athlete, great background, and I tell you guys, just look at the demographics. Look at every other major sport, and it's got black athletes that dominate it, except wrestling.
Right.
That should tell you right there. That's a broadcast to everybody that wrestling is fake because black athletes are never featured. Now, they now feature a few of them, but they're still not in positions of importance. WWF has never had one in the positions of true importance.
Right.
So Ron Simmons had everything, but then, he was one of the ones that was positive in the drug test. I mean, and Ron's a lovely guy, but he just couldn't take it to the next level. But I want to tell you how good the thing got over. The people in the crowd were crying the day he won it.
So I was in Baltimore.
They were crying the day he won it. That was a great angle. And then you got Jake the Snake, who comes in, and he's a drugger and a drunk.
Right. I was going to ask you what your opinion was on Jake. He just had a comment.
He's a piece of shit.
Okay.
He's a gutless piece of shit. He's always had his own agenda. He is aptly named.
Right.
Yeah, he is well named. And the proof of the pudding is no major promotion will touch him. You can't count on him.
He said, I don't know, it was in DDP's book. He had a quote in there. He said that if he had the chance, he would pee on Bill Watts' grave, but there's a long line.
Well, that's true, and he doesn't have the guts to do it. He would be too afraid that Bill Watts would come back and snatch his balls if he could find them.
Right.
Because Jake was never known for courage. So he's the typical guy that could say that from a distance or in a drunken dope stupor.
Right.
So, what Jake says or doesn't say is of no consequence to me. He's aptly named, and he's a piece of shit.
Okay. Getting back to house shows and stuff, you started putting emphasis on house shows again, starting doing title changes, non-TV and stuff like that.
Well, I think you have to.
Right.
You've got fans that still pay for those house shows. And I think if you put everything on pay-per-view, which we know that's a bigger arena, but if you make, first of all, then pretty soon they know that nothing has any meaning in a house show. So I think that's wrong. I think fans should be able to come to every match wondering what's going to happen instead of coming to every match knowing what's going to happen.
Right.
You know, let me tell you, John Wayne didn't kill any Indians, but he didn't ride off in the sunset with his arm around him at the end of the fucking movie.
It's true.
So I just believe that the fans like to be mystified. They like to be challenged. They like to think they got you figured out, but you can't let them have you figured out.
I guess in the locker room you had a reputation of being hard to deal with and stuff like that. As far as that's a lot of people's,
You know, I think a lot of guys blow a lot of shit up. If I'm more of a Lombardi or Mike Ditka type. I say what I think,
Right.
and I'm very passionate about what I want, and I demonstrate that passion. And if they're not doing it the way I think it needs to be done, then they get their ass chewed. But I think that they all knew they were respected as not only as athletes but as human beings, and that everything I was trying to get them to do was to better the business or their career. Now, a guy that didn't make it with me or didn't fit with me, he would have a bad attitude toward me.
right.
But most of the guys that have wrestled under me that are still stars have listen, they didn't have to take me to dinner. I buy my own dinner. The respect I got was because I deserved it or demanded it. And that's what it all gets down to. I don't have to like the son of a bitch I'm working for if I think he's right or I think I respect him. There was times that Vern Gagne and I had really differences of opinion, but I respected Vern Gagne. Didn't agree with everything he did and get really frustrated and pissed off at him, but I respected him. So the bottom line is any wrestler that has a brain knows that I cared about the business.
Right.
And I was trying to make the business better. It wasn't just my agenda. It's what I thought needed to be for the business. And you can look at WCW today, the clusterfuck it is.
Right.
You see the end result of letting the inmates run the asylum.
Also in '92, well, I don't know what year exactly this happened, but
Now, you guys are for ECW. Bring up Paul E.
that's what I was going to ask Paul Heyman.
I
What
think
happened?
Paul was the most talented damn guy in the world, but I needed him to fit in within the parameters of what I was trying to develop there and do it the way I wanted to do it. And Paul just didn't have enough time around me and me around him with all the other shit I had going because he was talented. And then he would screw up. And I make the athlete accountable. I don't think you got to get the money and then you give me an excuse that you didn't make the show because the motel failed to wake you up. Or you missed your damn plane because you waited to the last plane of the day. I told him one time, I can't find Delta Airlines, I'll find you. Or one day the rent-a-car broke down. I said, well, as much as I'm going to find you, you could have bought a new one. Because it's up to you to get there. I don't give a shit you get there. Because that's the trust the people have. And if we're paying the money, that's what you have to have. And I'll guarantee you, I bet you Paul E. has a little different look on life and the business now that he owns it.
Right.
That changes you. When it's position, it's whether you're an owner or you're an employee. And it makes a difference. But now, as far as talent and ability, it was huge. And I wanted to like him and I wanted to work with him. We just got off on odds and then we just never did get a chance of putting him back together. And then I wanted to get rid of him because I don't need to have to battle somebody every day with everything else I'm doing. I'm a big one on either you fit my dressing room or you don't.
He was fired, I guess.
I think he was. I can't remember. I think then it got into Turner Broadcasting's legal, which really had to make it a clusterfuck because Paul E's a smart guy, and I think his dad's a lawyer, so that thing probably went on for 900 years. I don't know.
Right.
But, I mean, I have no animosity whatsoever at Paul E, and I've seen that. I don't watch his show, but hell, he's survived, and he's been the little guy out there. So he's put something together, and he's appealed to the people that's tremendously successful. So, hell, my hat's off to him.
I guess you had a lot of critics also at the time when Eric Watts came in. And
Yeah, but that's stupid shit. That was the time because Eric had the ability. First of all, he could have probably beat most of them that were there.
right.
The next thing, he grew up in the business. We didn't have the same shit with Dustin and Dusty or anything else. It just was because I was there doing this and that, and the Sheets do this. Let me tell you about the Sheets. The fucking sheets sit there and agree, and then when you do the changes that they wanted you to do and you make them, then they got to figure something else to do, or else their sheets are no good. So they got to live on strife. So no matter what you did, you couldn't please them. And I didn't try to do anything to please the sheets anyway. But the bottom damn line is this thing got started with Eric, which was bullshit. I would have brought anybody in with his credentials and built them.
Right.
Bottom line. Now, the fact that he's my son, I'd build him anyway. He has paid a hell of a price being my son in this business. I don't know why he stays in it. I keep telling him to get the hell out of it.
Right.
You know, but he loves this business. Now, maybe apparently Paul E. sees something in Eric. So they may have that missing thing, because I don't give a damn who you are. When you're the athlete, you need somebody that believes in you. But my son Eric did great for the time, and he did everything I asked him, and he's got more ability than just being in the ring. He sees this business very well, like any second generation guy that's grown up in it would. So if I had to do all over, I'd do it the same fucking way.
What's your views on Cactus Jack? He worked for you.
Oh, shit, he's great. Is that the one that's Mankind?
Yeah.
That son of a bitch has no personal regard for his own body.
Right.
I used to say, Jack, you're going to kill yourself. But I liked him. I on purpose rode with him a few times. I wanted to see what was in that head of his. And I was amazed. This guy's got a mind that's challenging. I'd like to spend more time with him. Jack, all he ever tried to do is see how he could take it to the next level. And that's the kind of guys you want.
He wrote about you in his book. He said he worked a match with you.
Did he?
Yeah. You did something in Titan when you went to Titan.
Well, I think it was here quick. When I came back.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it was going to happen, that silly ass Jack and them. And I think he just did it for the fun with it. And I appreciate it. Right. He is just, I got lots of time. See, people like that want to give their all to the business. That's my kind of guys. The guys that always want to steal something from the business, like the Vinny Vegases, where Vinny Vegas, I talked him into staying in the business. Then he got to be a big star, and then his head outgrew his body. Now he thinks he's the toughest son of a bitch in the world, the greatest wrestler, and the greatest manipulator. Well, he's not the toughest son of a bitch in the world. No basketball player is, first of all. The second thing, he's damn sure not the greatest guy that can draw money, and he couldn't manipulate his way out of a fucking wet paper bag, or WCW wouldn't be in the trouble it's in.
Right.
So, but the bottom line is he has a great ability if he'll finally get over his head problem of thinking he's God and come back to being normal. He's still a talented guy. The guy I missed that's turned into so talented that I didn't think would, and it'll show you the opposite. The guy that wanted it so damn bad, he just kept doing it, is Dallas Page.
Right. I
didn't think Dallas Page, I kept telling Dusty, shit, no. But I want to tell you, that son of a bitch just kept humping. And now he's the kind of guy that made it because he wanted to so bad. And that's another kind of guy I like. A guy that just doesn't give up. I'm not infallible. Hell, I make a lot of mistakes. But I'm one guy that can admit my mistakes.
There's a lot of the legend of Bill Watts is if you don't do something right, sometimes you come to the dressing room and you'll let the guy have it or whatever. But
let him have it verbally.
Chris Candido was saying to somebody that there was one time where he wasn't selling in the ring and you might have hit him or something like that, and he said, "No, that's how you sell." Chris Candido.
Who is Chris? I don't remember him. Well, yeah, I would. First of all, I grab them when they come in. Later, I set up a video thing where they could go right to their video with Ole Anderson, and he could start correcting.
Right.
But I figured that's the time to get him and show him. And yeah, if a guy didn't sell right, I brought him in and showed him how. Now, did I hit him in a shoot manner? Shit, no.
Okay.
Oh, hell no. Hell, I'm 60 years old. Who the hell can I whip?
Right.
But yeah, did I get in their face and show them how to throw a punch right, or show them how to kick right, or show them how to sell right? Yeah. And the thing, let me give you a friends. How many guys you see in the corner, a guy's strangling him, he's got his hands down here on the ropes. Now you stop and think, if a son of a bitch is strangling you, where's your hands going to be? Up there trying to get his hands off.
Right.
So I may come up and say, okay, you saw it, and I may strangle him real quick by shutting off their blood, their air for. Now that's how you do it.
Right.
Now they remember that. But the bottom line, I was 55 years old when I was at WC. Who the shit can a 55-year-old guy whip?
Right.
So I mean, no, I didn't intimidate anybody physically. Maybe with my passion. Again, it depends that if the guy that loves the business, then the passion is going to help him. The guy that's just there and ain't made it or not going to make it, the passion then is going to piss him off. But I mean, the bottom line is they have a right to their feelings, and I have a right to my feelings, and I'm going to express. Ditka said it. He said, I'm used to coaching guys that want to play football, not babysitting. And Lombardi and Bill Parcells. Hell, you guys are around that area. Does he tell them what he thinks of them?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, everybody has a different way of doing it. I just don't kiss their ass if they're out there screwing up.
When you worked for Atlanta, what was it like working with all the committees and all the bullshit and the politics?
Bullshit.
Right.
Time consuming. Wasted time. And then they'd spend money that was unbelievable. And you'd have to have. I finally thought they would just have the fucking booking committee down there where they have Talk Back Live and have everybody in it.
Right.
But that's what they wanted. So I just knew I wasn't going to be there long. I held on because, the first job they wanted me to do was fire Dusty. Instead, I walked in and said, I'm here. I'm your boss. My first job is to fire you. Can we work together, Dream? And we worked together, and Dusty's tremendously creative. And Dusty will be the first one to tell you, I fined his ass. I fined him $1,000 when he kept doing some shit I told him not to do.
All right.
But he got the message. And he's still hanging on, or was. When I went back to Vince, Shawn Michaels screamed when he saw me coming, you son of a bitch, I didn't do this 2 weeks and you fined me. I said, did I ever fine you again? He said, no. I said, it must have worked, huh? And Shawn Michaels was so talented. So, I mean,
he started with you back in Mid-South, right?
Yeah, but a talented kid. And Sid Vicious, which nobody could get sick. I love Sid Vicious. He never gave me any trouble. He tried his heart out for me, and he tried my way. I can't argue that. Vinny Vegas did too.
Right. Before
he got such a melon head. I said, stay in the business. Don't quit. What if he'd have quit? I talked him into staying in the business when I was at WCW. And let me show you what I really measure the guy. My own son, he won't book. Now, I kept him in the business where he's made millions,
right.
And he won't book my own son. I don't give a shit if you're booking my son as a job guy. I'll tell you another guy. Paul Orndorff was broke, and I got him back in WCW, and he still got his fucking job. And Paul Orndorff knocked my son and said there was no value to the guy that was booking him. And that's the kind of guys that I just wonder about, that they don't think they owe anything. Now, I've never asked him for a damn thing from me. I don't ask anybody for anything from me. But Eric Watts has never heard any of it. And he's thought the world of both of those guys. And they got a hard on over something they perceive about me that they're not man enough to deal with me on face to face, a 60-year-old man. So they take it out of my fucking kid. I think they're chicken shits.
All right. I get it. Let's see. WCW, getting back to what exactly happened there as far as you...
Bill Shaw is such a subversive kind of guy. You ever get out there where you feel that, like I say, I don't mind the arrows that are shot head on. You've always got those when you're dealing with anything. It's the ones in your back. They're getting shot in by the guys that are supposed to be working with you.
Right.
I never felt that Bill Shaw was anything but a subversive. He's a typical human resources. He was head of human resources, and this was under him. And you couldn't get to Ted to tell Ted, hey, he's the problem. Bob Dew was a dynamite guy, but Bob at that time was running a little bit too hard and not able to put in all the time he needed to put. But still, Bob Dew saw it and was a good guy and was supportive. I couldn't fire the accountant. He was a piece of shit. But the funny thing about him, I finally at least got his respect, and he started realizing what we were doing. And I thought we ended up okay, but you couldn't get rid of the jerks.
The corporate.
Yeah, look at Eric Bischoff. I at least got his contract completed for him. He's a booth announcer for Gagne, and then he got into, but he's a perfect corporate guy.
All right.
So all these guys are going up and crying to Bill Shaw and zinging me instead of getting their ass in and shoveling and going. So, it just got to the point where, first of all, I didn't need it. And if I had needed it, I quit. They didn't fire my ass. I quit.
That's what I was going to bring up. The interview you did for the Pro Wrestling Torch, Wade Keller. I guess you made a comment. You said if you had owned a company, you had the right to discriminate.
No. It's so taken out of concept. Somebody asked me what I thought of Lester Maddox, who was, I guess, a governor or something of Georgia one time. And I said, well, at least he backs up what he believes with action. He had a restaurant and didn't want to have to serve everybody, so he closed it. That's called free enterprise. I don't think you should have to legislate how we act. And so I was asked in my initial interview with Turner Broadcasting about that and said, that's taken out of context. This is exactly what happened. I said, I think if that's what he believed, at least he said what he believed and he acted that way. I can deal with people like that a lot better than the lying, subversive sons of bitches that tell you one thing to your face and knife you in the back.
Right.
And so then a year later, when this jerk that's, what's happened to today is a chicken shit like him can hide behind his newspaper where they're paying the lawsuit, where it used to be just walked in and slapped the shit out of him because he hadn't got a gut one and he can write articles that defame your character that aren't even true. So he writes Hank Aaron this bullshit. And the funny thing is, I'd already resigned and was going home. And me and Dew were just, my last day, I said, Dew, I'm out of here. I'm through. And then Shaw called us over to ask me about this. And I said, and I told Shaw right then, I said, you chicken shit, we've already been through this. Fuck you. I said, I don't need you. I don't need Turner Broadcasting. Fuck you. I'm going home. And Shaw says, turn to Dew, says, Dew said, yeah, he's already quit. He didn't know anything about this. He's quit. So that was nothing. Right. That was a deal that Bill Shaw would have tried to blow up in order. See, Bill Shaw was afraid that with the merger with Turner Broadcasting that somebody else would get his job. So he really, I believe that Bill Shaw's real agenda was to get rid of Bob Dew for two reasons. Bob Dew was making more money than he was because his deal was based on performance on a deal he'd made with Ted Turner before Bill Shaw was ever on board and running the Omni. And I think the next thing is Bill Shaw wanted Bob Dew's job as president of the Omni so that if Turner did this big merger, so I think there were agendas that none of us ever knew about that affected how people were doing things. But I have no respect for Bill Shaw or
Right. What do you think needed to be done to make everything work?
I think it was on the right track there. We needed more support from the television. The amazing thing is all the things I wanted to do, they now do. I wanted Ron Simmons during the World Series to be picked up on in the crowd and to be able to be sitting next to Ted, or they wouldn't do any of that. They wouldn't. Hell, you couldn't even get Turner Broadcasting. What's the guy named Rick Sager or whatever his name is? You couldn't even get them to pick up on one of our guys at a football game. It's like we're the wrestling, but we're the bastard stepson.
Right.
All these things that you could bring to bear with this huge Turner, who could stand up to Turner Broadcasting if it was run right? The amazing thing is one guy in Stanford, Connecticut, kicks their ass because he knows what he's doing. And with all the multiples, the wealth and the power of Turner Broadcasting, and now that conglomerate, they suck pond water. That shows you how bad they're run. They hired an outside firm to come in and see what was wrong, and the outside firm found out nobody cooperates. They ran one survey to say, how should we have wrestling? Everybody do it different than Vince McMahon. What'd they do? They turned around and copied Vince McMahon. Mm-hmm. The only thing they did that was the first thing I wanted to do there, I wanted to put our free nationwide broadcast, when we do those big specials, head up to Vince's pay-per-view. Realizing that Vince, whatever we bled off of him, killed him because it didn't hurt us. It was free.
Right.
I wanted to run our pay-per-views, head up to his pay-per-views, make people make a choice. They wouldn't do that. Then what'd they do with Nitro?
Put it head-to-head with Raw.
When they own all these networks. Now, if you were out there strictly to compete, would you want to go head up with your guy, or would you want to try to garner the whole evening for yourself?
Head up.
No, you'd want to garner the whole evening for yourself. You'd want to double. But if you were trying to put a guy out of business, you'd want to be head up.
Right.
When you have 30 companies to write your losses off, and he doesn't, everything you bleed off. So they then went the predatory route against him. But see, I'm an old competitor. I wanted to do that way back. So I told Vince, I said, let me tell you, you better start documenting this because you got a hell of an antitrust suit against these guys. When they own the network and they come in and go against you head up, that's predatory. But he's kicked their ass. He has kicked their ass.
Right.
See? Now, that shows you how stupid, to my book, Turner Broadcasting is.
So you got out of the business in 90...
Whatever that was.
Yeah, it was like 92, early 93.
I went back for 3 months with Vince and did 3 months of consulting. I think I really wanted to get to know him as a person, see what I thought of him. And then again, I guess still thinking about this business and wondering if I was wanting to participate in it. But I realized I didn't. and he and I parted on good terms, I think, and I think we learned something about each other. I think I made some contributions there when I was there, but I think I realized then I didn't want anything to do with the business after that.
There was talk that you went in, and I guess Vince gave you the impression that you would have total control over some of the characters, and I think there's a rumor that you wanted the belt on Brett and he wanted the belt on Shawn.
Nah, we never disagreed. We did have several disagreements there, but there was never a disagreement over who was boss. And so whatever I didn't give a shit. Whatever he wanted, no, that had nothing to do with it. I just wanted, he was going to switch the title anyway. I wanted to switch it at Madison Square Garden, and he finally agreed. That had nothing to do with it. Characters, as far as me controlling their development, no, that had nothing to do with it. I wanted to ease some of his problems because he is such a genius, but he gets to the show and he's having to babysit all the problems. And I said, this is not the time or the place for you to do the babysit. When we're at the show, we need to run the show. And he turned the television shows over to me, running them over there. And he stopped the car one night. We were going back to Chicago and pulled it over and said, get out and just give me a hug. He said, I have never seen a show run this well.
Really?
So he and I had a fabulous rapport there. I think the thing that got him with me was that I was wanting to make the character of the creative department stand on its own. And I resented that he would come in and tear it down the next day and we didn't get to put it on the air the way we wanted to do it to see whether it worked or not. And he was panicking with the Nitro thing. But now, as far as being first class with me, the guy was first class. We never had a disagreement where I told him off or he told me off. We shook hands.
Who made initial contact to come there?
They did. I didn't.
Right.
They did. I didn't. Poor Jim Ross is the one that catches everything. So my airplane, every time he tries to get me in somewhere, it's the stress that he went through. But the difference is at WCW, Jim Ross was doing a hell of a job, and he got screwed at WCW. But it's been a blessing because Vince recognizes Jim Ross's talent. Jim Ross is a talented person. Vince surrounds himself with talented people. He's got a dedicated group. I don't agree with the extreme they've gone to in many departments, but I don't watch it. But I want to tell you, the way he runs his company, I admire. Hell, it's the way I run mine.
Right.
He's hands-on. He does it. He may not be he is just as passionate as I am. Vince McMahon's passionate. I haven't seen him back down from anybody. He may handle him a different way diplomatically than I would, but I want to tell you, the guy, damn sure, he runs his company.
Where did you? I guess you just said you don't still follow the business today.
The amazing thing, you don't have to. Somebody called me the other day, and I was sitting there and telling them, they're talking about WCW, and I said, well, here's what's wrong. He said, gosh, do you watch it? I said, hell no. Nothing changes. Sting came up to me one time when I came back and said, well, things have changed, Bill, in the business. I said, you're right, Sting. We used to have to draw money to get paid. But it hasn't changed. The business has not changed, that you can't come up to speed just like that. I wasn't watching the business when I went back to work for Vince.
Right.
And you just come up to speed just like that. You may not know the people, but you know the psychology. You know how to. And I have a phenomenal gift. It's a gift of seeing something in somebody and learning how to get it out of them. That's from my end what it is. It's how to see it and how to bring it out and how to fit it into a package that makes sense. And I have that gift, and that doesn't change. My desire has changed. I don't have any desire. I just seeing how you see how my language is talking the business. Right. My language is not like that when I'm not talking wrestling. I'm at peace.
Right.
I'm at peace with my God. I'm at peace in the business I'm in because it's helping people. I don't deal with the stress. I don't deal with the egos.
Would you ever want to get back in the wrestling?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. I think that there was a time for me to do it, and I think if I said that would be emotion. I think anybody that has been as successful at something and knows they know it as well as I do would think, yeah, I'd like to be back in it. I don't think I have the emotion that I want to be in it on a full-time basis and having to deal with it. And it's kind of like my wife asked me, well, can't you just leave it at the office every day? The wrestling business is not something you can leave at the office every day, is it?
Right, no.
If you're going to be in it, especially at the level I am, you got to live it. You got to get down the mud, the blood, and the beer. You got to feel it. And I can't do that. I have the same capacity to promote the sex that they do. I just don't believe that way. I think that's some of the things. I don't think it's good for our children. I don't think it's good for our children to show double fingers and have 316 up here. I think it's almost blasphemy. And so that's my personal. Well, then what am I going to do? Say that I believe in Jesus Christ? I'm out here in the wrestling business for him?
Right.
I think too many people are seduced by that. I think football players would say, I play football for Jesus Christ. I don't think they've really thought about it. Jesus Christ wouldn't have played in a game that was maiming people. He wouldn't have been in a game that hurt people. He wouldn't have been in a game so ego-centered. So I have a big conflict, and am I perfect? No. I'm a horrible example of a person that believes in Jesus Christ, but I'm not saved by what I do or have done. I'm saved by what he did for me at the cross. And I cling to that. And I'm saved by grace. And it's a big struggle for me because everything I've ever done is built on this testosterone world of me as an aggressive human being. And it's so hard for me not to be, as you can tell. I mean,
Right.
You know, Jake the Snake was here. I'd look right in his eye and spit in his face because I think he's a scum. You know, or anybody else. I don't care who they were. Let me tell you, they've only got two choices: to sit there or wipe it off or to fight me. And I'm not afraid of anybody physically. I know I can't whip anybody anymore. I'm an old man, but I'll tell you, bring your lunch. It's still going. You still got to do it. You can't make an interview about it and think it's done.
Right.
So I mean, that's all that it is, you know. And the funny thing about guys like me is when you have this kind of approach to life, where you're willing to lay it all on the line, very many people want to call it because the price may be too high. See? So I love the business. I'm not around it and I'm at peace. I love what I did in the business. But I don't really want to be in the business.
What do you think if you were to come back? What do you think WCW would need to do to change?
WCW, first of all, they'd have to give somebody autonomy, which they promised me, but that was a lie.
I said if there was one guy that could change things around right now in WCW, it would definitely be
it would be. They'd have to give me autonomy and then back it. And they'd have to analyze it from what I was doing instead of what they thought I was doing, based on what a bunch of idiots that don't know anything about it are analyzing it.
How do you feel on the boys running the business as far as Kevin Nash? He's now,
Kevin is okay. Kevin Nash has a great talent. Is he sat down and understood that if he was going to work there and they had a powerful booker that knew what he was doing, he was going to do what that guy said. If not, he needs to take a hike. Let me tell you, they all need to take a hike. Vince can't use them all.
Right.
Some of them he doesn't even want. So there's always going to be new people, but you need to build the new people up that have a loyalty to your company. You don't need a Scott Hall in rehab and in na-na land. You know, Kevin Sullivan, bless his heart, is a neat guy, but he's never been a successful booker in his life. What do they think is going to be a booker out of him now? Ric Flair is a wonderful guy, wonderful performer. He's not a booker, never has been, never was. So you have a bunch of people doing something that they have no talent for doing, and it's showing up. And then so what they do, they start blaming it on the business or they blame it on WCW. That's how shallow their loyalty is. And that's the hardest thing for any of those guys to look in the mirror and accept the blame for what they're doing themselves. It's always easy to critique, you know.
What's your opinion on Eric Bischoff?
Eric Bischoff must have been a successful creature of the corporate world. I did never have think much of him in any way, shape, or form. I had no respect for him. I didn't think he was a very good announcer. I didn't, what he did. I think they caught a hot streak. I never heard a good report on him. At least when he came to me and complained about the fact that he had a contract there and Jim wasn't using him, I said, then we'll get Jim straightened out and Jim will use you based on your contract. And I finished his contract there. I wanted to send him home, but they'd already brought him there and everything else. Legally, we didn't have a leg to stand on. Otherwise, Eric Bischoff would have been gone. He designed a couple of game shows. And the funny thing about Turner Broadcast, same thing as Hulk Hogan, who, by the way, this is a two-sided thing I'm saying, but when Hulk Hogan did movies, he became a different kind of star. He became the desirable star because he was a movie star. Eric Bischoff designed some games, so all of a sudden he was a genius, whereas they think wrestlers are all idiots.
Right.
And going back to Hulk Hogan, I never worked around Hulk much, but he has to be a very sharp individual. He's made more money than anybody in wrestling. So the bottom line is that's then who is the best, even if he's lucky to be there. He damn sure knows how to manipulate Hulk Hogan and how to get him over. So he is without a doubt a powerful force in this industry and has been. And he's over there. So somebody's not listening to him either because he's got a hell of a lot better ideas than where they're. I don't know who's doing what over there, but I know you've got plenty of talent there.
Right.
You got Sting still there. You got Lex Luger, who Lex Luger's a great athlete, has never drawn any money. He's always had something missing. And I would have liked to have had more of a chance to challenge him because but he'd already pulled up. He shocked me when he double crossed Vince. That really fooled me about him. I didn't know he was a liar.
Right.
He's the kind of, you got plenty of talent there to challenge. And I don't even know the younger guys. Buff Bagwell is a kid that I love. He was one of my little stars there. They got so many people with name recognition. It just shows you what a clusterfuck it is how bad it's being run now. Somebody said it's going to lose maybe 20 million this year.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Where do you see the business in 10 years?
I haven't even thought about it in 10 years because I don't care where it is in 10 years. You have to care about something to project it out, and I have no care. I mean, the business is history in my life.
Where do you see yourself? What are you actually doing today?
I'm in nutraceuticals. I found a company that has made a major technological breakthrough. That's probably the most important thing for mankind in the last century, where they've discovered how the human cell actually communicates. It's a company that's based on helping people. They have the owners are visionaries that also believe dearly in Jesus Christ as Lord. And this company has destiny, and it's going global. It's not been easy for me because it's network marketing and I'm a control and tell type of personality. And in network marketing, you can't control anybody. Every person that comes in the business is independent and has their own business. So you got to try to help them and educate them and motivate them on their own. But it makes it so challenging. First of all, they don't have to babysit them. They either do it or don't do it. And if they don't do it, you can get somebody else to do it. And they don't have to have any ability. See, in wrestling, you either have to have physical ability. Sometimes you even have to have mental ability. You have to have some gift that's a physical gift, though. In network marketing, you don't have to have any gift. You don't have to be able to talk. If you want to do it and are willing to learn how to do it, it's the most powerful business in the world. So we are able to help people with their health, have optimal health. The next thing, we're able to help them with a big problem called lack of moneyitis. If they learn how to do the business, they can make more money than they ever made, and it's called leveraged residual income, which is huge. My income keeps increasing. But the biggest thing, I only work at 3 days a week. And we travel and go anywhere we want, and I'm happy. I've got a wife that I love dearly, that I think God blessed me with, because I think that I've made a lot of bad decisions in that department too since my divorce that happened at the end of Mid-South, which was a devastating thing that was, I think, the product of me struggling with my faith and with the business and with everything else. And I was finally blessed with somebody that fits me to a T and loves me. I feel loved. I enjoy the business I'm in. The people I meet, I'm building relationships in a whole new area. And the relationships are a different depth. They're people that, when I get calls, instead of them bitching me out or griping or complaining or whining, these are people calling me and said, thank you for sharing this product. I've got my life back. George the Animal Steel is one. He was given 3 months to live when I called him.
Right.
I didn't know anything about Crohn's disease or how sick he was. He cussed me out the first time because he thought I was trying to capitalize to sell him something, and he was sick. He's disease-free now.
From this product?
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is, we were just down there the other day and had a cocktail party. Every person at the party not only was on the products, but had a life-saving experience on the products. Now, the saddest thing with my peers in wrestling is they're all skeptics. They all think they know it all, and they won't research something fully. And they think if you don't take it now and don't feel it now, like speed or
right.
Tylenol or shooting hormones or something like that, that it must not be any good. So they're the ones that need it, because the National Football League even found out the guys that played 9 or 10 years were dying at age 50. And the retired NFL Players Association put people on the products, and a 3-month test found the reversal of chronic disease states to be amazing. This is so important to educate people about. This is something that's going to change the world. Now, wrestling's going to change it too, but I think of the two, I think this has got a lot more rewards where I want to be.
If people need information about this, is there a phone number or website?
Well, yeah, they can always call me or visit my website, but they can call. I don't want to put my phone number here because I create the same emotion, I'm sure, by this interview I did in the dressing room. Some people will agree and some people think I'm an asshole. And I've been called an asshole for a long time. Matter of fact, I really was proud of being an asshole. You know, it's just like anybody else. I did it my way. Now I'm trying to do it another way. So when I'm not in this business, I don't even talk like this. That's one of the things it brings back. It brings back that competitive anger. And I think you have to be passionate, but I like being passionate without being angry.
All right. Do you have any questions?
Nope.
It's definitely been a pleasure. And
I want to make one final question, which you said you'd put on this at the start of. These are all my personal opinions. And I think I have a right to my personal opinions. If I've said something about anybody, they're the truth as far as I know it, and they are my own personal opinion. And, you know, there's just some people, I don't get along with everybody in the world. And, you know, I care for people. So if I've said something that's hurt somebody's feelings, if the shoe fits me.
TitleMatchNetwork.com